Rolling right along here on the Ostrom Avenue podcast with Ethan Frank. I'm Johnny Gadamowitz. Now we're joined by Ehsan Kassim of the Tallahassee Democrat and NoSports.com. Ehsan, how's it going today? Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, everything's going well. Had practice this morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, we're happy to have you preview all things Orange and Seminoles. Let's hit on FSU. 6-3 coming into this matchup. A little bit of a weird year. You think about the nature of that season opening win over LSU. A couple of losses since then, though, going through ACC play. What's sort of the overarching takeaway of this Seminole season thus far in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think entering the season, a lot of people thought Norvell was on the hot seat, which was kind of probably a little ridiculous with the buyout money, the money they owe Taggart. I don't think that was ever the case, but they've shown clear improvements in year 3 under Norvell and head in the right direction and have an argument of being the best team in the state of Florida right now, which I don't think Florida State has said in a while. So that's impressive, especially when you look at UCF is 22 in the college football ranking. So Florida State has been impressive this year. Jordan Travis has played like an elite quarterback at times this year. He's probably played himself into being drafted somewhere, so that's also been nice to see.
So Johnny mentioned those wins against, LSU and then the last couple weeks, but you had the 3-game losing streak, Wake, NC State, Clemson, who people could argue, maybe that's the 3 best teams, definitely, in the Atlantic, maybe, Carolina could give them a run for their money in the Coastal. But when you see FSU lose to those 3 teams back to that, but then come back and blow out Georgia Tech and Miami coming into this game, would you say this team is peaking right now at the right time?
I would definitely agree with that. I think it's fair to say they're peaking right now. Like you mentioned, they the 3 teams, Wake Forest and Clemson, I felt were clearly better than Florida State in every aspect in those 2 games. I would argue that NC State, Florida State should have won that game. They hurt themselves, and that's a game they should have won. Probably a game at the end of the season, they'll probably look back and be like, how do we not win this game? It's probably all good when they're bowl eligible, and they probably still get to 9 wins this year because the schedule shakes right now. They're probably the favorites in all the games remaining, so, including Syracuse. I think they're a favorite right now as well. So,
as far as Norvell is concerned, you think about kind of the last 2 years, each losing seasons for FSU. Now you mentioned that bowl eligibility. Regardless of how these last few games shake out for the Seminoles, just how big was it for Norvell specifically as the head coach of this team, kind of going through what this program has went through over the past couple of years, to go out there and establish that, that they're a squad that is to be taken seriously in the ACC?
It's huge. I mean, right now the recruiting is still lagging behind the 2 other Florida schools in Florida and Miami. So, I mean, and they did get a big 5-star commitment from Hakeem Williams, who is from the Miami area. But overall, they need to do better in recruiting. He's done well in the transfer portal, but they need to recruit better. They need to win the state of Florida a little bit in recruiting, which has been a lot of Miami, Florida decisions, So there's still work to do for Norvell to, make sure the program's back, because you can't depend on the transfer portal as much as they did this year. But it's a huge step in the right direction. And it will prove the recruits, hey, look, you come play here at Florida State's, don't want to say back because that's the running joke with Texas every year. But they're working their way back, and he's a legit coach. He has a decent staff around him, and the players are bought in, which is the number one thing you want to see. And I think one thing that people forget about is 2020 was the COVID year. It was kind of a lost season. So 2021 was his real first season. No matter, you could say this, it's his 3rd year, but it's his 2nd real year, because 2020, how many coaches that count for, especially your first year, that's hard. Couldn't go out and recruit, couldn't go get recruits on campus. So this is his 2nd real full year, and he's done pretty well with it. And it takes time to build a culture, which I think Miami fans and Florida fans are experiencing right now with, new head coaches.
Absolutely. Norvell comes from Memphis before this, whereas last year with the Tigers went to the Cotton Bowl. So, his rise with the Tigers felt kind of exponential how well he took, that program to one of the premier bowl games in the entirety of college football. What is expectation? Like, is the expectation, okay, now we've seen that he can win. Does that mean going forward, Florida State fans expect, New Year's Six bowls?
I mean, I think that's interesting. I think Florida State might still be a year away too for that. It depends on what happens to Jordan Travis next year. Does he go to the NFL or does he try to go to the draft? Who's the quarterback next year? I've discussed it a few times. I don't think the quarterback for next year is on the roster. So that who they get in the transfer portal. It's when you go from 3 wins to 5 wins, and then to how many ever Florida State ends up with this year, let's say 8 or 9. It's the growth is linear, but once you get to 8, 9 wins, I don't think it's linear anymore. Like where you could say, if they win 7 and 5 next year, you could say they're clearly worse. At that point, once you get to 8, 9 wins, I feel like it's not the growth is not exponential. It's kind of like it's hard to judge because you can't just look at win-loss records. I mean, obviously, Florida State wants to get to the New Year's Six bowls. I think that's probably a year or two away.
In the context of Travis specifically, it sort of feels like, and you mentioned you think he'll be off onto greener pastures. It seems like he's really figured it out and sort of has been at the helm of what this offense has done as of recently, particularly in that Georgia Tech game, nearly 400 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns as well. What do you think makes him so dynamic? I mean, obviously the dual threat nature of his game, but what sort of allowed him to elevate his game to the next level this year?
Definitely. I think it'd be 2 things. One would be the coaching. He came in as the guy during the offseason, was not like, was not being told like, this guy's gonna push you, this guy's starter. He was the guy at quarterback. And that instilled some confidence in him to go out and also play more loose, play more free, to have, to feel as a leader of the team. And I think that's really helped him grow. He's always believed himself as a quarterback, but I think to have that people around him trusting him helped as well. And then number 2 is Florida State has the best offensive weapons they've had in years. You look out wide at Johnny Wilson, 6'7", is a ridiculous athlete. He literally took over when after Travis got hurt, took over that Louisville game with the backup Tate Rodmaker to steal a road win for FSU. They got Micah Pittman out in the slot, who is a good receiver, good yards after catch guy. Ontario Wilson, who's been at Florida State forever. Kentron Portier, and then the running back room is just Trey Benson has been the Pro Football Focus's most elusive running back. Trayshawn Ward is averaging over 5 yards to carry. Lawrence Toafili is a good receiver out of the backfield and can also run between the tackles, about 8 to 10 times a game. So the offensive weapons around him, the offensive line has played much better than it has, even with 2 early injuries to key players, they've kind of regrouped and rebuilt. And the offensive line for Florida State has been better. It's been in the past years.
So if you look at Travis's numbers, he's throwing, same completion percentage as last year, right around 63%, but he's got 700 more yards in only 1 fewer game than he had all of last season. And that's with a 17-4 touchdown to interception ratio. He uses his legs well, 50 for 225 and a couple of touchdowns. So what has made him so, I know you said, giving him that confidence of being the guy in the offseason and the skill position players, but just from, looking at him on the field, does he have more of a, maybe a little bit of a swagger, or is the poise there that, he knows, he's confident about what he's doing?
So I didn't cover Florida State last year. I actually covered the team that beat them last year, Jacksonville State. So, from what I've seen and what others have talked about is it's the one, he's not running for his life every play. That offensive line, a lot of times, and sometimes in the pocket, we've seen with quarterbacks when they're back there, they kind of see ghosts even when there's not pressure. I think that was a little bit of a Jordan last year as well. As he's sitting back there, or he wouldn't sit back there because even if there was either pressure, if he felt the pressure when it was not there. Now he's able to sit back in the pocket. If you look at his rushing numbers, there's been a few games where he's run more than others. Like obviously had a knee injury against Louisville as well that kind of slowed down his running for a couple games. But he's trusting his pocket, he's trusting his arm to make the plays instead of depending on his legs as much, but he can still make the plays with their legs when it's needed.
The offense as a whole extends well beyond just Travis. You mentioned some of the weapons that he's been throwing the football to. As far as the ground game is concerned, it's been pretty effective as well. Sort of a three-way split with Trey Benson being the main guy there. Just how much, and Syracuse has gone through this for the past few weeks now, going up against teams that have really multiple capable threats from a running back position. Just how much of an advantage do you think it gives Florida State that, hey, look, not only do they have this quarterback who has weapons that he trusts, but they also have options in the backfield and different types of running backs that they can use in a wide variety of scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, Trayshawn Ward, who's been their starter most of the season, was out against Miami. He was only going to play in case of emergency. He had a shoulder injury, suffered against Clemson. Or sorry, it was NC State he suffered against. So without their start, they've rushed for over 200 yards in each of the past 4 games. 3 of them without their number one guy, who's been their number one running back all year, and they went that game. And part of it is because of the blowout nature, but also it's just because how effective the run game was. Against Miami, they ran the ball 49 times and passed 16 times. I think that number was like 37-12 when Jordan, Travis, and the starters were in. So they were able to control the game with the running game against Miami. Georgia Tech, they threw a little bit more, but against Syracuse, who struggled, you mentioned struggled against the run the past 3 weeks. I would expect Florida State to come out with a heavy run package, especially since Syracuse has done pretty well defending the air this year.
Yeah, and you look at the list of quarterbacks Syracuse has faced recently. Travis might be the best one since September, and Brennan Armstrong at Virginia, because Clemson, DJ Uiagalelei got benched in that game. Drew Pine at Notre Dame, nah. And then Pitt with Keaton Slovis last week didn't play that well either. It was all the running game. So with a Syracuse defense that has been hampered by injuries, Jordan Travis, I think, could even have a big day through the air. Syracuse doesn't have Garrett Williams, its best cornerback. So, maybe they come out with a run heavy emphasis, but do you envision Travis being able to take advantage of the air as well?
You know what, a lot of times the Florida State likes to do is some play action and bootlegs and get Jordan out in space. So if the running game is going well, it opens the door for those kind of passes. And then, you can't put if the running game is going well, you can't guard Johnny Wilson one-on-one a lot of times. And that's a guy you just like to throw the ball up to, because why not? He's 6'7" and has a ridiculous, and he struggles with drops from time to time, but you can live with that with someone who's going to go out and catch the most ridiculous passes, in the red zone.
It sort of seems like the common denominator amongst every Florida State win is the defense. The Seminoles holding teams to just under 16 points per game across those 6 wins. Just how important is that side of the ball? I mean, obviously, they, led by Jared Verse, have had a good thing going in the games that they win. What sort of makes this defense a unique one, and what's sort of their philosophy on the defensive side of the ball?
So it's interesting. They've played a lot of bend but don't break defenses this year. So they've allowed 19 points over the last 2 games. And then, the other one was Boston College at 3 points. So those offenses were really not very good. So I think that kind of brings the number down. So defense has been obviously getting you mentioned Jared Verse, he missed a game. His first couple of games back, he kind of struggled a little bit. They got Fabian Lovett back now. Some of the young players have emerged, but for that defense to do well, they got to control the run game. And if they don't control the run game, they're not, the talent in the secondary is not as good as that has been in the past. And they've struggled with that a little bit as well. But if they can defend the run, it helps defend the pass. So they got to work on both levels, because the defensive talent is still a little behind the offensive talent, in my opinion.
So when you look at Syracuse's offense, you got Garrett Schrader potentially back for this game. Not exactly sure. Florida State preparing for, maybe a question mark at quarterback. Obviously have the film of Carlos Del Rio Wilson last week. How do you think Mike Norvell, has he said anything about how he's preparing for, uncertainty at the quarterback position from a defensive perspective?
That's been a theme for Florida State this year, actually. The last 3 weeks, they've, Georgia Tech Jeff Sims was dealing with the injury, and he ultimately did not play. But they prepared for 3 quarterbacks, the backup and the freshman. Last week, no one knew if Miami was going to start Van Dyke. They prepared for Jeff Garcia. They prepared for Ja'Cory Brown. So they were prepared for everything in that game as well. So this will be a third straight week. They have one less quarterback to worry about this week compared to the last 2 weeks. But and Adam Fuller talked about this a little bit on Monday at his press conference, defensive coordinator. He said Schrader and Wilson actually have a closer game than he anticipated a little bit. So that kind of helps to prepare for a quarterback that's, someone's probably might be a little similar. I have not able to watch either quarterback play much yet, but I know Schrader is one of the defenders call him a running back playing quarterback. That not in a disrespectful way, because he obviously can pass it, but just how he can run the ball and make people miss and make moves and get stuff done with his legs. So they've been preparing for both, and they will prepare for both, and probably be ready for both. Now, when it goes to practice, they struggled against some running quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels against LSU. They struggled against Malik Cunningham, and then they struggled against DJ, against Clemson a little bit. So the running quarterback has given them issues this year. So it'd be interesting to see how they defend that, how they're ready to defend that.
Obviously, playing in a place like the JMA Wireless Dome, a very unique atmosphere for a team like Florida State, obviously from the South, coming up to the Northeast here to kind of enter an unfamiliar environment that is the Dome, a place that has been noted all year to be loud and, frustrating for opposing teams to have to deal with as far as communication is concerned. How do you foresee the Seminoles sort of handling that new environment, maybe something that they haven't had to deal with too much this year? I don't know if that's been a topic of conversation at all throughout the week, but what's sort of the vibe surrounding that situation?
Yeah, so they practice. They have an indoor stadium that they practice in, and they just turn the volume all the way up, and just they also had not similar situation because LSU was a neutral game with at the Superdome, but they amped it up for that game as well. So they've done it a few times. I was having a conversation with someone earlier. This could be like their NC State game where they've won the games they're supposed to win, and Louisville game with Jordan's injury, you could argue that they won a game that they were not supposed to win, but they need to go out and win a game they lost NC State in a game that was winnable because I'm not sure if they were ready for that next step of their progression. Now this is their chance to go to Syracuse and prove, in an environment like you mentioned, that's gonna be loud. It's gonna be hard to communicate at times. It's gonna be loud. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be, an opportunity for them to prove, hey, is Florida State ready to take the next step and move up a little bit in the rankings and prove that they're, capable of going to a bigger bowl game?
So can you answer that question for us? What do you see happening on Saturday? Can the Seminoles handle the road environment up in cold Syracuse, New York?
I think they can. It kind of depends. And my prediction for the game would kind of depend on if Schrader plays or not. If he doesn't play, I think Florida State goes in there and kind of wins, maybe by 2 possessions. If Schrader plays, I expect a close game, a dogfight, and it might be a 3-point win, for Florida State around there.
All right, well, there you have it. Ehsan, can't thank you enough for coming on. That's Ehsan Kassim of the Tallahassee Democrat and NolesSports.com previewing the Orange and the Seminoles coming up from the Dome this Saturday. Ehsan, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.